The Imperial Archives would be recorded as Incident 7 Kappa, an anomaly, a footnote, a curiosity. But those who witnessed it knew better. They knew that the day Alara Voss found the cub in the waste districts of Theron Prime, the galaxy shifted on its axis in ways no physicist could measure. The Theronian Empire had ruled for 3,000 cycles, its clawed grip extending across 47 systems. They were apex predators, leonine bodies covered in obsidian scales, eyes that burned like twin suns, voices that could shatter reinforced glass. They conquered not through technology alone, but through fear, through the understanding that they sat atop the food chain and everyone else was merely food. Humans were recent additions to the Empire, absorbed a mere 2 generations ago. They were considered soft, weak, tolerated only because their nimble fingers excelled at the delicate work of maintaining fusion cores and navigating quantum matrices. The Theronians gave them scraps and expected gratitude. Alara Voss was a maintenance engineer, assigned to the lower districts where even Imperial citizens refused to tread. She had learned to keep her head down, to move through shadows, to make herself small in a galaxy that reminded her daily of humanity's insignificance. She found him on a Tuesday, or what the human colonists still called Tuesday, clinging to Earth's memory like a life raft. The cub was barely the size of a human infant, his scales dull with malnutrition, one eye swollen shut from infection. He had been thrown into the recycling chute, left to die among the Empire's refuse. The logical choice was clear: walk away. Theronian law was explicit. Predator cubs belonged to the state. Interference meant interrogation. Interrogation meant disappearance. Alara picked him up anyway. She named him Tor, after an old Earth word for tower, something that stands when everything else falls. She smuggled him into her quarters in a maintenance kit, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might give them both away. For 3 days she fed him synthesized proteins from her own rations, cleaned his wounds with stolen medical supplies, and watched as that swollen eye slowly opened to reveal an iris like molten gold. On the 4th day, the Empire came knocking. Commander Zarath stood in her doorway, all 9 feet of him, his ceremonial armor catching the corridor's dim light. Behind him 4 soldiers with plasma rifles. Behind them the bureaucrat, a thin male with calculating eyes and a datapad that likely contained her death warrant. "The cub," Zarath said, his voice a subsonic rumble that Alara felt in her bones. "Return it." She should have complied. Every survival instinct screamed at her to comply. Instead, she stood her ground in that cramped doorway, all 5'3" of her, and said, "Ah, no." The word hung in the air like a grenade with its pin pulled. Zarath's pupils contracted to slits. "You do not understand what you protect, human. That cub is defective, abandoned by its blood clan for weakness. It is already dead by Imperial law." "Then the law is wrong," Alara said, and even she was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. The bureaucrat stepped forward, his claws clicking on his datapad. "Interference with Imperial eugenics protocols. Theft of state property. These charges carry—" "I know what they carry," Alara interrupted. "I also know that 3 days ago your empire threw a dying child into the trash. If that's strength, then I'll choose weakness." For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The soldiers' rifles hummed with building charge. Then Tor appeared between Alara's legs, stumbling on still uncertain paws, and looked up at Zarath with those enormous golden eyes. The cub made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a purr, and pressed against Alara's shin. Something changed in Zarath's expression. Something Alara couldn't name. "You would face execution for this creature?" the commander asked quietly. "I would," Alara said. "Wouldn't you?" The question clearly caught him off guard. Warriors didn't expect philosophy from maintenance engineers. "I am Theronian. We do not question the law. Maybe that's the problem." The silence stretched. The rifles hummed. Then Zarath did something unprecedented. He laughed. It was a terrible sound, like tectonic plates grinding together, but unmistakably laughter. "Stand down," he told his soldiers. To the bureaucrat, "File this as a cultural adoption. Precedent, the Kelvin Accord, subsection 7. Commander, that subsection applies only to—" "I know what it applies to." Zarath's voice could have cut diamond. "File it." The bureaucrat fled. The soldiers lowered their weapons. Zarath lingered in the doorway, studying Alara with an expression she would spend years trying to decipher. The Empire will murmur about this, he said finally. They will call you fool, traitor, soft heart, let them. They will also watch. And if that cub survives, if he thrives, Zerath paused. Well, perhaps the Empire needs more fools like you, Alara Voss. He left. She closed the door. Her knees gave out and she slid down to the floor where Tor waited. His rough tongue rasping against her cheek in what might have been gratitude or simple affection. 20 cycles later, the Empire still murmured. They murmured when Tor grew to full size, his scales gleaming like polished midnight, his presence commanding respect in every room he entered. They murmured when he refused a military commission to instead study xenobiology. They murmured when he stood before the Imperial Council and proposed reforms to the eugenics protocols. His voice, Ilara's voice, they said, for hadn't she raised him? Calm and unwavering. They murmured when half the council voted in his favor. Ilara was older now, grayer, still working in maintenance because she liked the work, and it kept her humble. She watched the news feeds from her small quarters as Tor gave his first address as Imperial Adjunct for Interspecies Relations. He spoke of strength through diversity, of the courage required to show mercy, of towers that stand when everything else falls. The Empire murmured. But increasingly, some of those murmurs sounded like agreement, and in the depths of the night, when Tor visited her quarters as he did every week, bringing exotic teas in his impossible bulk somehow fitting into her small space, they didn't speak of empires or reforms or history. They simply sat together, the woman who chose compassion over survival, and the cub who became a bridge between worlds and enjoyed the comfortable silence of family. The galaxy had shifted, and somewhere in the Imperial Archives Incident 7 Kappa remained a footnote. But those who lived it knew. Some footnotes change everything.